Did you watch the hearings on Thursday? Did people in general watch it? How many people actually watched it? I didn't see that number. But keep in mind, watching it isn't everything. If people watched it, were they paying attention? How did they interpret what they heard and saw? These hearings, and of course January 6th itself, are real signs of the deep division of the country. But it's no longer simple division. It's not about North versus South. It's not black and white. We are broken. We are fractured. We are fragmented. And every side begets more sides. And maybe it's always been that way. Religions have offshoots and branches, and sometimes they go to war with each other. In politics around the world, we see extremists and right-wingers and conservatives and progressives and leftists and liberals and many competing ideologies all fighting amongst themselves. So here in America, we too have infinite sides. Essentially, we now live in a country where everybody is potentially the enemy. And as I watched the footage and Officer Edwards describing the scene we were witnessing as carnage and chaos like a war zone, I thought, this is where we are as a society. People could watch this unfold as they have recent past horrors in the society, and there will now be a large percentage of people who don't even believe it happened. That January 6th didn't happen, that JFK Jr. is still alive, that Biden is a robot, and Trump is a human being. I mean, there are people who believe the Parkland children, and soon enough the murdered Uvalde children will be accused of this too, of being crisis actors. That these mass shootings of children are false flag operations that are staged to further a certain ideological agenda, despite what they saw with their very own eyes. And you know, it's good to question what you see in front of you with your own eyes because we are lied to and deceived so many different ways. And false flag operations have and do exist. No question about that. But the murdered children and grieving families? Are these children in dressing rooms taking off their makeup, or are they being buried? At a certain point, you must use your own judgment. And if you judge the brutal mass murder of school children as fake, your judgments are diluted, whether you're the victim of mass hypnosis, which is possible, or just stupid. We hear people, mainly political leaders and TV commentators, say, well, nothing really happened. It was a dust-up, a skirmish. Everything was returned to normal. Well, first of all, many people died as a result of this dust-up, whether they were shot, beaten, or committed suicide. And secondly, we can only blow the whole thing off and say things returned to normal because the attempt to overthrow the government failed. We only returned to normal because the Trump-led attempt to overthrow the government failed. We heard a lot in the hearings about the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. But who are they really? Are they social clubs where men meet and drink coffee and pray? Or are they a well-funded and well-organized paramilitary crypto-fascist Christian nationalist organization? And if they are, where is the money coming from? Where is the dark money coming from that funds the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers? We're talking about paramilitary here. That's not cheap. That is not something you just throw together. That requires funding for equipment and weapons and space for training. I mean, millions. And you don't get that from potluck dinners and charity bake-offs. So where does that money come from? Who underwrites right-wing, white supremacist Christian nationalist organizations? That question, that fundamental question, that basic question is still never asked by the mainstream media. Where is that money coming from? And you wonder why you don't get an answer from the government, from the politicians, from the media. Why? Because if we dug deep enough into the financial picture of these multinational corporations, we would see the same right-wing dark money in the coffers of the media, the politicians, and the government in general on all levels. It's funny when you hear Scalise or McCarthy sarcastically whining, oh, why don't we have public hearings on inflation or gas prices? Yeah, that would be great. Let's do that. Let's have public open hearings on everything. How about that? No secrets about anything. Let's have open hearings about JFK and Vietnam. And don't forget George Bush's war crimes in Iraq. Let's have open hearings about that. I'm open to open hearings. But if we don't recognize that there's a difference between inflation problems and gas prices and the attempt to overthrow the entire government based on a lie by a president who has lost the election, then our problems transcend inflation and gas prices. And who controls those things anyway? You see, if the Democrats were skillful, they could tie this insurrection to inflation and gas prices and malaise in America and poverty and joblessness and bleak futures and no futures. But they don't seem to have the skill to weave that tale. And yes, there have been arrests and there have been convictions. But overall, let's face it, the convicted have received very light sentences overall, pretty much slap on the wrist type sentences for their role in this insurrection. Now, imagine if a black man took a shit in Nancy Pelosi's office or stole her podium. He would be getting 30 years minimum. And I'm not even saying that these people should get heavier sentences. What I'm saying is, if a black man had done any of these crimes, he would have gotten bare minimum 30 years, and I don't think anyone would disagree with that. We shouldn't forget for a moment how different this entire situation would be perceived or judged if the participants on January 6th were black, if they were protesting poverty or racism or police brutality. What would the end result have been? How many black protesters would have been killed? And have the police and the government and many people in the society justify and even celebrate it? Remember when Martin Luther King planned to march on Washington? He was murdered as a response. And what about our responsibility? We, who purport to care, who purport to be outraged, have come to not only expect it, but accept it, just as we do every day. So remember, all successful coups were preceded by failed coups. Don't fall for the spin. The spin is immediate. The spin is so fast that it makes you vomit like a bad amusement park ride. The spin is the lie that makes us sick, and the only cure is the truth.